Id, ego, and superego. In psychoanalytic theory, the id, ego, and superego are three distinct, interacting groups in the psychic apparatus, defined in Sigmund Freud's structural theory of the psyche. They were introduced by Freud in his essay, Beyond the Pleasure Principle, and later developed in The Ego and the Id. Freud used them in order to describe the basic structure of mental life, as it was encountered in psychoanalytic practice. Originally, he used the German terms das Es, Ich, and über Ich, which literally translate as the it, I, and over I. However, the Latin terms id, ego, and superego were chosen by his translators, and until now remain in use. To describe his structural model, Freud used the analogy of an iceberg. Just as only a small tip of a much larger iceberg is visible above water, so only a small fraction of the mind is conscious. Most of the mind lies below the level of awareness, in the unconscious. The id. The id, according to Freud, is the dark, inaccessible part of our personality. It is its unconscious instinctual component that is present at birth. It is the source of bodily needs and wants, emotional impulses and desires, especially aggression and the sexual drive or libido. The id acts according to the pleasure principle, or the psychic force oriented toward immediate gratification of impulses and desires, and is concerned only with satisfying itself. Developmentally, it precedes the ego, and is oblivious to reason and morality. Understanding of the id, according to Freud, is limited only to analysis of dreams and neurotic symptoms. The ego. The ego, for Freud, is that part of the id which has been modified by the direct influence of the external world. It represents what may be called reason and common sense. It is the sense of self, and is capable of psychic functions such as judgment, intellectual functioning, memory, control, and defense. The ego acts according to the reality principle. Because the id's drives are often incompatible with social reality, the ego attempts to satisfy its demands in accordance with the imperatives of that reality. The ego is in fact required to serve three masters, the id, the external world, and the superego. In doing so, it seeks to find a balance between the primitive drives of the id, the limitations imposed by reality, and the strictures of the superego. Concerned with self-preservation, it strives to keep the id's desires within limits, adapted to reality and submissive to the superego. Because the ego struggles to harmonize the competing forces, it can easily suffer neurotic anxiety regarding the strength of the passions in the id, realistic anxiety regarding the external world, and moral anxiety regarding the superego. The ego may want to serve the id, but the superego is constantly watching its moves and punishes it with feelings of guilt, anxiety, and inferiority. To overcome this, the ego employs defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms such as denial, projection, and rationalization reduce the ego's tension and anxiety, by disguising or transforming the impulses that are perceived as threatening. Freud compared the conflict between the ego and the id to that between an unruly horse and its rider. The rider, the ego, has to direct the unbridled energy of the horse, the id, in a way that is neither too permitting nor too restrictive. The superego. The superego, according to Freud, reflects the internalization of cultural rules, as absorbed mainly from parents and also from other authority figures. It can be described as a successful instance of identification with the parental agency, and, as it develops, it also absorbs the influence of those who have stepped into the place of parents, such as educators, teachers, and people chosen as ideal models. The superego aims for perfection. It works in contradiction to the id. It is mainly, but not entirely, unconscious. It includes the individual's ego ideals, spiritual goals, and the psychic agency commonly called as conscience, that criticizes and prohibits the expression of drives, fantasies, feelings, and actions. It is an internalized mechanism that operates to confine the ego to socially acceptable behavior, whereas the id merely seeks instant self-gratification, regardless of reason, society, and morals. Freud favored the structural model of the mind, compared to his earlier topographical model. It allowed him to be more precise, clear, diversified, and effective in describing mental life, especially disorders. Despite this, however, many criticisms have been raised against it. For example, the idea that the id is the dominant part of personality is considered problematic, especially Freud's emphasis on unconscious drives, like the sexual drive. According to critics, this oversimplifies the intricacies of human nature. Another example is Freud's idea that the superego emerges in childhood because children fear harm and punishment. However, research has shown that children whose greatest fear is punishment only appear to develop morals. Their real motivation is to avoid getting caught and prevent harm. Moral sense actually develops when a child experiences love and wants to keep it. To do so, they engage in behavior that exemplifies their parents' morals, and therefore gain their approval. Despite these criticisms, Freud's ideas about the id, the ego, and the superego have been, and continue to be, very influential in psychology. If you like our content, please follow us on Facebook, and subscribe to our channel for more videos. Thank you, and see you in our next one.